Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us to kick off our intro to the PHIS export module. We will be starting this process today to walk you through how the industry will be submitting an application, how the inspector will be doing the export recertification, how the actual export certificate will be printed out, the steps you'll go through. We want to make sure you understand the security in the system, the roles and responsibilities, both the plant level, the corporate level, the broker level. And so we have a long day ahead of us. We're going to have breaks in between. We're going to have it broken up into various topics as we go along. But first, it's my honor to introduce to you our Acting Undersecretary for Food Safety, Mr. Alan Monza, to kick off this meeting. So, Al?
Thanks, Bill. How many folks do we have on the line? Do we know? What? 120. Wow, a lot of people. Golly, that's right in my face there, too. All right, so good morning, and certainly thank you all for having me here today. This has been one of those things that's been a long time in coming. We're certainly glad that we have the opportunity to have folks here in person and via webinar. Many of y'all that are participating from across the country, and that's a great thing about these webinars, to be able to do this and to be able to include everybody with this technology that we're able to utilize. So as many of you know, modernizing and improving efficiencies has been one of my priorities with my time here in D.C. One of the most significant changes that I've seen in my time here has been the shift from paper to data, which has been extremely helpful to our inspection workforce. The Public Health Information System, or PHIS, has been one of the most important efforts to collect, consolidate, and analyze data in order to improve public health. PHIS has been and will continue to be an important part of FSIS's modernization efforts because the data in PHIS is essential to the agency's ability to identify food safety systems that need an increased focus. PHIS allows the agency to electronically input and collect inspection data in one central location. The availability of PHIS data makes for more timely and efficient analysis of food safety inspection results and allows us to identify trends, which helps us to take quicker action to be able to protect public health. The PHIS update that this webinar is focusing on is the new export component. This change in PHIS means that the export application and certification system will be available in an electronic format as an alternative to the paper-based process that we've been using for many, many years. The final rule was published on June 29th of 2016 with an implementation date of June 29th, 2017. At that time, we will begin a phased-in implementation for countries. We expect to fully implement the new system in December of 2018. Fully implemented refers to all business entities, including those that are both regulated and non-regulated. Non-regulated entities such as brokers who are involved with requiring an export certificate to export product to all countries will be available through PHIS, or all product exported to all countries can be exported with a PHIS-generated export certificate. We expect to have 230 countries in PHIS by 2018 under this phased-in approach, and we could have up to 15,000 users with the broker community. After this webinar, we will be conducting technical meetings with industry, which will expand upon requirements for submitting the export application. Please keep in mind that industry is responsible for maintaining their own accounts, assigning roles, and monitoring the system. You should have backups in place, remembering to delete people from the system who leave, and need to log in every 90 days to ensure that the account remains active. Please remember that if you allow your account to lapse or do not get proper authentication access, your access to the system will be gone, and it may take an extended period of time to restore, which may affect your business needs. If we all use this system effectively, it will serve us in becoming more efficient at collecting data and detecting public health issues early on. This update to PHIS will make for a more efficient system with our partner countries and a prime example of how we're modernizing at FSIS. I want to close with thanking everyone on the phone by this webinar, and certainly the people in this room, because this really is one of those things that we've been looking toward for a long time. I believe that we're going to get better at it very quickly. I'm certain that there's going to be some hiccups, as there is with anything that we do with IT, but this is certainly a step in the right direction. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Al. So, again, I'm going to be turning the microphone over shortly to Carol Spencer. She's going to walk through the agenda and the itinerary and the topics we're covering. But I do want to reiterate again that this is groundbreaking from the standpoint that we've been trying for almost 20 years to automate exports, and with PHIS export module, we think we have a process that's going to work to meet the industry's needs, as well as the foreign country needs, as well as the agency needs. So at this point, I'm going to be turning it over to Carol Spencer to walk through the logistics of the meeting, and then we'll get started with our first topic.
Good morning, and I also thank you for participating in the webinar on the export application for the Public Health and Information System. The information and functionality we are about to share with you, for the most part, represents the automated process for the export application that will be launched June 29th. This presentation includes information for all entities that could conduct export business with PHIS, including enhancements of the domestic industry functions to include corporations and brokers and other functions we believe are important for you as a user to know and manage, such as PHIS access. I do understand you also have an interest in being able to batch your export application, and so do we. As mentioned before, we are in the planning phase for a technical meeting that you will need to include your technical staff at as well. Once those plans are completed, we will share that information with you on the technical meeting. As you can see from the agenda, the topics are divided in sections with questions and answer period following each. We realize that this is going to be a lot of information to take in at one time, and you could have questions up to and perhaps beyond implementation. For questions and information on the presentation you're about to see today, your last slide gives a hyperlink and emails where you can send your questions. Additionally, I believe you were told that we are recording this session. We will send out to you a DVD as well as post the presentation on the website. So I'd like to get started with the first session. It's going to be on system security, e-authorization, and enrolling. PHIS has many layers of security in the system itself, certificate features, and mandatory requirements for each user. As we go through this presentation and combined with the access control presentation at the end of the day, you will see how it's necessary for you to manage your and your employees' access to PHIS. I'd like now to turn it over to Mr. Marvin Light, the Acting Chief Technology Officer.
Good morning. I will be mentioning and discussing the security controls for customer access to PHIS. But before I begin, I will go over a few security components. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability are the three pillars directly tied to the production of PHIS. FSIS has implemented a 24/7, 365 on-site cybersecurity operations center that's responsible for not only monitoring of the security tools presented in this diagram, but also for the identification and mitigation of security threats such as malware and denial of service attacks, which are very common nowadays. Ensuring proper security controls are implemented, such as strong end-to-end encryption, customer authentication and authorization via eAuth, and with a defined customer role within PHIS, provides the layered security approach FSIS has implemented. So as I point to the diagram here, what we see in the diagram to the far left is a customer that needs to access PHIS. In the far right-hand corner, in the cloud-based solution, it's PHIS in its entirety, the front public side of PHIS. In order to access PHIS, there are several security controls that you have to bypass, that you have to pass to access PHIS. The first that you'll see is that PHIS itself is a public website that is also encrypted, meaning that in order to access the site itself, there is a trust relationship between your computer and the web server itself. So what we'll do is we'll walk through a diagram of how you access PHIS. After you enter the URL, which is PHIS.FSIS.USD.gov, you'll definitely see a digital certificate that you have to validate. That ensures that your communications between your client and the PHIS server itself is encrypted itself. Very important to have encryption built into the communications. Without that, there's major security risk associated with it. As you get to the front end of PHIS, you're going to hit the agency's firewall and security perimeter. The perimeter has additional security controls implemented as well, just to make sure that the communications coming in is a trusted source. Once you are able to get to the firewall, your communication is then passed on to the USDA e-authentication system. That system serves a valid and important critical role in just verifying your user credentials match the system itself. Once your authentication has been confirmed with eAuth, you're then passed on to the next security tools that does another check and balance. And this tool here looks for malware and denial of service attacks that are very common nowadays. Once the communication passes the gateway solution, it's also introduced into a intrusion detection system. This system does a deeper analysis of malware and common threats as well. So if your computer is able to get through the various checks, which it's supposed to, then you're able to access PHIS. As you can see, though, in the diagram, there's four controls. There's a firewall, there's the USDA e-authentication, there's the gateway, and then there's the intrusion detection system. Those systems are all monitored by the 24-hour, 7 days a week, 365 Security Operations Center. And they're looking for malware attacks, unauthorized access, just to make sure the system itself is stable. So these are the security controls that are implemented for access to PHIS. The intent is for the customer to access the system without any issues, making sure that the data quality itself is available and that it's available to the user whenever they need to have access. These are the controls that are currently implemented for PHIS. Thank you.
The Federal Register notice that was published last June 2016 indicates that when we launch, which will be this June 2017, we'll be using a new 7-digit stamp. This picture represents what the stamp looks like, so we just thought it important to share with you, and so you'll have a copy of what the new stamp will look like. In that same notice, the agency also mentioned that there will be security paper. This security paper is different from the paper you're used to using. And this is a copy that we will make available at implementation. It will be in 8.5 by 11 as well as 8.5 by 14. It has security features that are embedded in the paper itself that we hope will prevent or deter fraudulent certificates from being published. The certificate printed on this paper will be scanned and uploaded in PHIS with a watermark and available for viewing for the applicant and the foreign government. This is the EOF Level 2 process that we've talked about a few times. It is managed by the Department of Agriculture, not FSIS. These next few slides are what you'll see when you go to the URL that's indicated on this slide. It's basically a wizard where you'll have to fill in information about yourself, your company, and what you're asking for, which will be Level 2 EOF. And this begins the wizard that you'll see. And I'm not going to go through each part of it. It will be available for you on the website. Next slide. Please be mindful that this process is just one additional step in security layering and one step that you will need to complete to gain access to the system. It's you, along with anybody else that wishes to conduct business in PHIS. When you register for your EOF Level 2, please be mindful that whatever name and email you use to register, you should also use that name and email address when you come into PHIS and register. One of the validations that your name and email address is a validation for getting in the system. If one is different and it doesn't match, you will not be able to get into PHIS. Okay, are there any questions about the security, what you need to do with EOF Level 2? We'll take questions in the room first, if there are any. Okay, Nina, are there questions on the line?
So to ask a written question, use the Notes tab on the lower right-hand side of your screen and address your notes to all moderators.
Okay. Marvin, thank you. I guess there are no questions online. So we'll move to the next section. I'm sorry, there's one question.
One question, what is the process when the email address is changed?
Yes, hello. For the question about when your email changes, you need to contact the EOF help desk and supply the new information for your change in your email address.
Okay, we have one more question. Will the locations that produce the health certificates be responsible for printing these documents on the security paper?
More time, please.
Will the locations that produce the health certificates be responsible for printing these documents on the security paper?
We will address that later in the presentation. Ask that question again if we don't answer it during the presentation.
So to introduce the next section on implementation and managing applications, it can be challenging to go from a paper-based process that you've been accustomed to for years to a process that is automated. And this challenge brings about inherent differences. At implementation, we are starting with the PHIS automated export library, validating a few features, such as product, HACCP code, species, maturity, signature requirements being wet or electronic, and other basic information that is needed for the replacement certificate. It is important to note that the web version of the export library will remain updated and available. A big part of the export application process or export package are the country-specific global statements and letterhead certificates. They will not be available in PHIS at launch. The applicant will have the ability to cut and paste global statements in the remarks section of the application and upload letterhead certificates in PHIS. And when you get into the system, you'll see that we're calling that section required documentation, and you'll see that in the next presentation. The global statements will appear on the certificate in the remarks section as they do now, and the country-specific letterhead documents will print after the certificate. Another difference between the two systems is that the applicant will no longer print the export application for IPP to sign. Instead, the applicant will receive from IPP a signed certificate that will also be scanned and uploaded back in the system and made available for viewing, as I mentioned earlier. So now I'm turning the presentation over to Beth Bartell with Harmonia Holdings.
Okay, thank you. To continue this morning, FSIS wants to share with you our approach for implementing PHIS export. The approach will be to start on June 29th, 2017, and roll out the application with 19 countries. The first 19 countries are listed here. Of these countries, the 3 bold countries are the ones with country-specific rules. The others in this table are countries that require only the 9060-5 certificate to export products. Before we get to the enrollment section, let's talk about existing industry roles and new industry roles. This slide shows the existing roles. The establishment administrator, who manages industry users and roles at an establishment. The plant manager, who can respond to non-compliance records and appeals, respond to memorandums of interview, establish a connection with a corporate entity, and invite corporate administrator and add establishment contacts. Here are the new industry roles. The corporate administrator, who manages industry users and roles at establishments associated with the corporate entity. The export applicant, who can create, edit, delete, and submit 9060-6 applications for any regulated establishment, and who can create, edit, delete, or submit the 9083 establishment application for export. The export broker can create, edit, delete, and submit the 9060-6 applications for any regulated establishment, but cannot create, edit, delete, or submit the 9083 establishment applications for export. Next slide. This part of the presentation covers enrollment, specifically these enrollment-related scenarios. How to enroll as an establishment administrator at an establishment that does not yet have an active establishment administrator. How to enroll as an establishment administrator, plant manager, or export applicant at an establishment that has an active establishment administrator. How to approve a request as the establishment administrator, and how to enroll as an export broker. Like all PHIS users, before you enroll in PHIS, you need to apply and be granted an e-authentication level 2 account. If you already use LSAS, you have an e-authentication level 2 account and do not need to apply for another e-auth account. If you are enrolling at an establishment that does not have an active establishment administrator, you need to ask your inspector to add you to the contacts page on the establishment profile as the establishment administrator. This requires that you provide your inspector with your first name, last name, and email address that you provided when applying for your e-authentication account. must be identical. The first scenario we will go over is how to enroll as an establishment administrator at an establishment that does not have an active establishment administrator. So once your information is listed in the establishment profile by the inspector at your plant, you can enroll in PHIS by going to the URL. Next slide. Upon going to this URL, you will see a page with two options. You want to select the top option, which is Accept Invitation option, as you are basically being invited by your inspector to enroll in PHIS. On the disclaimer page, please read the disclaimer, and if you agree, click the I agree checkbox and click Continue. On the industry invitation page, type your establishment number and click Create Account. So this is the page where you create the account. The home page appears and you are now logged into PHIS. Establishments are responsible for maintaining user accounts for all their users. Once there is a person who has an active establishment administrator role, she can manage enrollment requests for the other employees. FSIS recommends that each establishment designate more than one user with the establishment administrator role. Each establishment can have up to 10 registered establishment administrators. Now we are ready to go over the second scenario. This scenario covers how to enroll as an establishment administrator, plant manager, or an export applicant at an establishment that has an active establishment administrator. While the first scenario we discussed was limited to just one role, the establishment administrator role, this scenario applies to 3 roles. The sole function of the establishment administrator role is to manage user requests for an establishment, while users with the plant manager role can respond to noncompliance records and appeals, respond to MOIs, establish a connection with a corporate entity, invite a corporate administrator, and add establishment contacts. Users with the export applicant role can create, edit, delete, and submit 9080-3 establishment applications for export and 9060-6 applications for export certificates for their establishment. While the following screenshots I will show are for enrolling as an export applicant, they could just as easily be for how to enroll as a plant manager or as an establishment administrator. Just as before, the prerequisite is that you have an e-authentication level 2 account. Once your e-authentication account is active, you go to the URL. Upon going to this URL, you will see a page with one option. Click the Submit Enrollment Request option. On the FSIS Enrollment Request Wizard, Step 1, click Next. On the Step 2 page, for the Account Type drop-down field, select Industry and click Next. On the Step 3 page, for the Role field, select the appropriate role and click Next. On the Step 4 page, you would type the partial name or full name of your establishment, or you could type your establishment number and click Find. After the results appear, you would find the establishment you want to associate with and click Select. The page refreshes and the information for the selected establishment appears in the yellow rectangle, just below the Find and Reset button. Then you would click Next. The information on the Step 5 page is optional. You can complete this information or leave it blank and then select Next. The information on the Step 6 page is also optional. You can either enter comments or leave the page blank and then click Next. On the Step 7 page, it shows all the information you've entered as part of your request. You would review this information and click Finish. On the Summary page, you would log out. At this point, your request is pending approval by your establishment administrator. So the pending user account request leads us to our third scenario, which is to approve a request as the establishment administrator. Here you would log into PHIS, and from the left navigation menu, you would select User Management and then Manage Request. On the Manage Request page, you would find the request and click the Edit icon. On the Request page, if applicable, you would type any feedback in the Feedback field and select Send Feedback to the Requester checkbox. Then you would click Approve. Now that applicant will be able to log into PHIS and create 9060 and 9083 applications. Next slide. Our last enrollment scenario shows how to enroll as an export broker. Next slide. A note about export brokers. Users with the export broker role in PHIS cannot create, edit, delete, or submit the 9080-3 establishment application for export, but they can create, edit, delete, and submit the 9060-6 applications for export certificates for any regulated establishment in PHIS. The export broker role, unlike the export applicant role, is not associated with any particular establishment in PHIS, and therefore the enrollment process is slightly different, and PHIS does not limit which establishments brokers can export from. Next slide. Just as before, the prerequisite for enrollment is that you have an e-authentication level 2 account. Once your e-authentication account is active, you go to the URL, and upon going to this URL, you will see the page with one option. You would click the Submit Enrollment Request option. Next slide. On the FSIS Enrollment Wizard Step 1 page, you would click Next. Next slide. On the Step 2 page, for the Account Type drop-down field, here you would select Brokers and click Next. Next slide. On the Step 3 page, for the Role field drop-down, select Export Broker and click Next. Next slide. On the Disclaimer page, you would read the disclaimer, and if you agree, you would select the I agree checkbox and click Next. Next slide. When the activation page appears, you would go to your email account that is associated with your Level 2 e-authentication account. Next slide. Once you receive your email, you can just click the link in the email and a new window appears with the code pre-populated in the activation code field. Then you would click Activate Account. Next slide. After PHIS activates your account, your home page appears. Next slide. Okay, so now we will discuss how corporate entities and corporate administrators are defined in PHIS. We will walk through several scenarios. The first scenario is that a plant manager at Plant A creates an address record for a corporate entity and then associates Plant A with that corporate entity. Next slide. So for the first scenario, I will go in as a plant manager so I can connect my establishment to a corporate entity. If that corporate entity exists, I would be able to link the two entities, but here we will show you how to create the corporate entity. So from the left navigation menu, you would select My Establishments and select the establishment that you are linking to the corporate entity. From there, you would select Corporate Profile from the left menu. On the Associate Corporate Profile page, you have two radio button options. And since in this scenario the corporate profile does not exist yet, you would select Add New Corporate Profile. Next slide. Here you would complete the required fields and click Add. Note that the corporate record just contains a few data elements such as corporation name, address, city, and phone number. Next slide. After you click Add, the corporate profile page appears with the new corporate entity on top and the linked establishment in the grid at the bottom. Next slide. The second scenario is for the plant manager to add the corporate administrator to the establishment's contact page. This allows the corporate administrator to be connected to this establishment. Once this connection is made, only a user with the corporate administrator role can dissolve the relationship. The plant manager cannot remove the connection between the plant and the corporate entity. Next slide. To start off, as the plant manager, from the left menu under My Establishments, you would select Establishment Contacts. In the top grid, you would click Add New Contact. Next slide. On this page, you would complete the required fields. It is critical that the first name, last name, and email address are the same ones that the corporate person used to register for his e-authentication account. For the type field, you would select Corporate Administrator and click Save. Next slide. The Establishment Contacts page refreshes, and now the Corporate Administrator that you just added appears in the top grid. Next slide. So now we'll move to the third scenario, which details how the Corporate Administrator enrolls now that he has been invited by a plant manager at a plant. Next slide. Once the corporate administrator's information is listed in the establishment profiles by the plant manager, he can enroll in PHIS by going to the URL. From there, PHIS will direct him to the enrollment page, and on the welcome page, he will click Accept Invitation. Next slide. The corporate administrator would read the disclaimer, and if he agrees, he would click the I agree checkbox and click continue. Next slide. On the industry invitation page, you would type the establishment number and then click create account. Next slide. The home page appears and you are now logged into PHIS as the corporate administrator. Going forward, when you go to the PHIS URL, this is the page that would appear. It is important to note that to keep any PHIS account active, you need to log in to PHIS at least once every 90 days. Next slide. Now we will get to the part where another plant manager links another establishment to the same corporate entity that was created in the first scenario. Next slide. From the left navigation menu, select My Establishments and select the establishment that you are linking to the corporate entity. Select Corporate Profile. On the Associate Corporate Profile page, there are two radio buttons. This time, select the Search and Associate an Existing Corporate Profile option. Here, we are searching for the corporate profile because the corporate entity already exists for this corporation. Next slide. On the Associate Corporate Profile page, enter search parameters and click Search. From the list of results, select the house icon for the corporate entity you want to associate. On the dialog box, click OK. Next slide. The corporate profile page appears with the latest association in the grid. So you'll see on this page that we have one corporate profile at the top of the page, and it is associated now with 3 separate establishments. Next slide. So now we are ready for scenario 5, where the plant manager at plant B invites the same corporate administrator to be associated with plant B. Next slide. So this plant manager invites the corporate administrator by adding the administrator to the contacts grid at plant B. The corporate administrator is now listed in the contacts grid for both plant A and plant B. This is important so when the corporate administrator logs into PHIS, he will see the invitation from the plant manager at plant B. Next slide. Now we are ready for scenario 6. The corporate administrator accepting the invitation from plant B. Next slide. The corporate administrator will have an option when she goes to the PHIS URL to accept the new invitation or go to her dashboard. To accept the invitation, she follows the same steps as before, and on this page she enters the establishment number for plant B. Next slide. The home page appears and the corporate administrator is back in PHIS. The corporate administrator can now manage user accounts for both plant A and plant B. Next slide.
Okay, we are, have finished that section, and we'll take questions in the room, if there are any.
So, to repeat the question for the people on the phone, the question was how many corporate administrators can be enrolled? And there can be 10 corporate administrators. There's not a limit on the, okay, I'm sorry. For the people on the phone, the question was how many, like, industry users per establishment, and there is no limit for the number of industry users. So you could have multiple people with the plant manager role or the export applicant role. The question is, if you need to remove someone and the user has left the company, how does that happen? And actually, a little bit later on in the presentation, we're going to talk about how to deal with former employees who have left. So we'll go over as part of the presentation, but if your question is not answered, please ask it again. Are there any other questions in the room? Sure. The question was that in the list of 19 countries, there were some Islamic countries listed, and the question was, is there a requirement for a halal certificate? And I'm going to let Neil or Brian answer that.
Okay, if the country of three of those that were listed have requirements in the export library, then any requirements that are in the export library will be met. So if a halal certificate is required, that would be issued. For the other 16 countries that do not have any export requirements, they would only IPP will only issue a 9065 export certificate for those consignments.
Okay, so I think that's all the questions in the room, but we have a few from online, so I'll go ahead and start with the first one. One participant has asked, I have a level 2 and can log into PHIS without issues, but our inspector cannot add me as an administrator. The error message is not previously accepted invitation or similar. What should I do?
So this is Bill Smith. If there's any problems with existing accounts, we will provide a name for you to contact and an email address at this meeting to follow up, and we will do that after the lunch break to make sure that you have a contact person's name and an email address name for any existing issues. I also want to clarify for this meeting that we are presenting this information so that you have it in real time and can start thinking about this. The actual ability to do what we're presenting today will not be available till mid-May. But we think in the interest, and so I just want to be clear in this meeting, that we want to lay out to you what we're thinking, the steps, the security, who can do what role, so you can start thinking about these things. We will certainly also have a question where you can send questions into and a contact after this meeting, so that as you go back and look over this presentation, because we understand we're throwing a lot of information to you, one of the reasons we wanted to send you a DVD, and that you can go to the website, is you can have this presentation available to you so that when you go back and try and digest all this information, that then we can be able to answer your questions. So I just wanted to make those things clear, and we'll take our next question.
Okay, we have another question from a participant. For a large company, will someone at the corporate level be the establishment administrator and maintain security for all of the shipping locations that actually produce the documents, or does each shipping location with their own establishment number need to have their own establishment administrator? Okay, so for that question, we're actually going to go through it later, so please just stay tuned. And
yes, so this is Bill Smith again. So we will be covering this in detail. And so again, if we don't answer that specific question, please ask it again when we go through that process.
And we have another question. Are the personnel at cold storages, should they be enrolled as export brokers?
So again, this is Bill Smith. We will be going through those roles. In most cases, if they're acting as an agent for the company, yes, they would be an export broker. There is a scenario though where the corporate ability is also available for export, and we will go through all those scenarios in our next steps and presentations.
Okay, another question. Will each shipping location have to be manually associated with the corporate profile? The larger companies could have 40 to 50 shipping locations.
So the location would either be a regulated or establishment or a voluntary establishment approved for ID warehouse or export certification. Each one of those will be in the system, and they'll be able to select for those on the individual cert and through the batching process later on.
Okay, can an export broker also be an export applicant, as many export brokers are shown as the export applicant on the export certificate?
So this is Beth. The main difference between the broker role and the applicant role is that a broker can do business for multiple establishments and is not really connected with just one establishment. An export applicant is considered like part of the workforce of the establishment. He or she may work at 3 different plants that are all kind of related to each other, but they are more like the employees of the establishment. A broker is someone doing business on behalf of the establishment. Does that answer the question? Yes, it's a little. Okay, we'll move to the next question.
They said yes. Yeah. Okay, we have 2 questions about specific countries. One is, when will Canada be added to this program? And the other is, why is Afghanistan listed twice on the list of 19? That's probably technical.
So this is Bill Smith. So we'll look, that was probably just a glitch that we didn't catch Afghanistan. We will be sharing a list of countries and the rollout. We'll be going public with that later on. What we wanted to do was pick the first 19. We wanted to pick, one of the reasons behind the first 19 were that 16 of those 19 have no special requirements. The other 3 have letterhead requirements or global statement requirements, and we wanted to get some experience with those at startup, and then we will roll other countries in. Canada right now has a number of letterhead certificates and global statements, and so until we get a little more experience, both the industry and the agency, that is why they're later in the process as opposed to the beginning of the process.
Okay, so those are all the questions for now. I'm going to message some of you individually, but we'll go on to the next part of the presentation.
So we're ready for the next slide. And we're going to start with managing the 9083.
So for this section of the presentation, introduces how to manage the 9080-3, which is the establishment application for export. There are only certain countries that require that establishments have an approved 9080-3 application on file in order to export products. These countries are identified on the public-facing Export Library website. Next slide. The role that manages the 9080-3 application for establishments is the export applicant role. If the country you are exporting to requires a 9080-3, this is where you would go in PHIS to enter your application. For the first step, as the export applicant, you would select View 9080-3 from the left navigation menu. Next slide. On the Create View Establishment Application for Export page, click Create Application. Next slide. On the Select Establishment page, click the house icon associated with the desired establishment. Next slide. On the General Information page, you would enter the 9080-3 related data field, but you'll notice that on this page, many of the fields are pre-populated from your establishment profile. On the General Information page, you would enter any of the missing required data fields and click Next. Next slide. The 9080-3 application is basically broken down into sections. You need to select at least one option in each section. Sections for this form are the different areas such as category of products, type of operations, class of product, and so on. You need to complete all the sections and then click Next. Next slide. If the country you want to export requires additional documentation to be submitted with the 9080-3 application, you would find this information on the public-facing Export Library website. This is the page where you would attach your completed form. On the next page, we will go over the instructions on how to do the attachments. Next slide. First, you would click the Browse button to locate the file, and then you would click Open. Then you would complete the document title field and click Upload. Next slide. After all the necessary files are uploaded and the application is complete, you would click Submit. Next slide. On the confirmation box, you would click OK to confirm that you want to submit the application. Next slide. A confirmation message appears, and then you would click Exit Menu from the left navigation menu. Next slide. On the grid, your application appears with the status of Submitted. Next slide. At this point, if you click the View icon, the application you just entered opens in read-only mode. And you'll notice there's a View Report link in the top right corner. Next slide. If you click the View Report link, you will see a PDF of the 9080-3 application. Next slide. Are there any questions in the room for the 9080-3 application process in PHIS? Okay, the question was, after you go through this process, when do you find out if it's approved? And I'll send that to Brian.
The approval depends on the country and the requirements. Once the 9083 application comes to the Import-Export Policy Development staff, the staff officer handling that country will review the application, and depending on those requirements, they may be able to approve it immediately, or they may have to accept that and acknowledge that we have received it, and then process a letter of request. For instance, a couple instances are the European Union and Mexico. We have to process a letter, send it to those countries, and there's a subsequent delay anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks to perhaps a couple months. So depending on the process for each country and when we receive acknowledgement that the establishment has been approved, we will at that time go in PHIS and approve it. Until the IEPDS staff officer actually approves a 9083, it is not approved despite the approval process from OFO, from the IIC, the frontline, the district office, up to our office. So at that point is when it would become approved, and that's when PHIS would recognize that 9083 as approved for that establishment for that country. Sorry? It's a paper-based system today. The question is how do we do it today, and how will we notify industry? Well, they'll be able to check PHIS, and they'll be able to see the status, and Beth may be going over that later on, but they will be able to check the status and see where it is, and once we approve it, then that will be reflected as approved when the establishment or applicant looks for that particular 983 application. No, there will be no email generated going to the establishment notifying them of approval. Oh, I'm sorry, the question was how will it be an email to the establishment notifying them of approval? And no, there will not be an email.
So this is Bill Smith. So I think that's a very important process. That's why we're meeting. So you're recommending there be some notification, and we will write that down, and we will get back to you on what that will be. Thank you.
Okay, so now there's a few questions online. One is the 9080-3 form to get approved for an approved list for specific countries?
Yes, there are certain countries that require a 9083, excuse me, and those are listed in the FSIS export library under each individual country if they require that. If the export library listing does not require a 9083, then applicants do not need to submit one for registration.
Then we have another one. Do existing establishments need to submit this through PHIS? I guess the 9060-5? Okay.
So, another point that comes up, we will have an answer to that particular question. We don't want to give a bad answer. So we just have to go back and check the programming and make sure what the answer is. We will get you an answer on that.
Another question, will Form 9060-6 be added as well?
We will be going over that through later demonstrations today.
And how long will it take to get the 9080-3 form approved once it is submitted?
Once again, that depends on the country requirements. As I mentioned earlier, some countries have a very slow process, and it may take several weeks to a couple months. Other countries, such as Australia, are fairly quick and may take a matter of a few days once we receive the completed request here at headquarters.
Okay, that's all for online right now.
We have one more question in the room.
So the question was, do any of those 19 countries we started out with require a 9080-3?
Yes, Australia requires a 9080-3, but they will not be processed through PHIS when we launch in June. That functionality will be implemented at a later time.
Okay, that's all for questions right now. We'll go on to the next section.
Okay, one more time with that answer.
The 9083 functionality in PHIS will be delayed and not be implemented at launch in June.
So we will have instruction on how the 9080 process will work from the launch until that functionality is activated. And we will make sure that the industry is aware of Thank you.
One more question just came through online. Will the countries that we are currently approved for be automatically uploaded in the system, or will each establishment have to manually add these?
We will have to get back with you on that at a later time.
We will get the answer for the existing 9080 and how that will work in PHIS. That should be the agency's responsibility.
Okay, now we're moving to the 9060-6 application. Next slide.
Okay, as someone just asked in the online, how the 9060-6 and the 9060-5 would be fitting into the PHIS export modules. So that's the section we're starting here. This part of the presentation will cover the 9060-6 applications, and the topics we are going to cover include comparing the current and the new 9060-6 application forms. We'll be walking through the statuses of how a application goes through the review process. We'll be walking through how to submit the 9060-6 applications, how those applications are managed, and how replacements are managed. And we'll start again by comparing the existing form with the new 9060-6 form. Next slide. So I'm going to highlight the differences that exist between the current application for export certificate, which is on the left, and the 9060-6 application for export certificate that is required for the PHIS export module, which is on the right. The highlighted item on the left, the district number of the exporting plant, is the single item that does not appear on the new PHIS export application form. PHIS will apply the appropriate district number based on the location of the exporting facility. The PHIS export application on the right has several items highlighted which are new to the form. We will now briefly cover each of those new items. Next slide. On January 24th of this year, FSIS limited the reasons a replacement certificate can be issued for an original certificate. The replacement reasons are included on this new form shown in the red box, along with the request for a split shipment or consolidated shipment. Next slide. The shipment type options are now also part of the application. So you'll see there are 6 different options for shipment type. Next slide. The country of final destination has been added to the new form. Next slide. Exporters now have the option to use a unique identifier. If you opt to use the unique identifier, you need to provide the identifier in the space provided. Next slide. The HACCP category under which the product was produced will be used to verify product eligibility, and so this information is now required on the application. The automated export library uses the HACCP category to help determine product eligibility. Next slide. The product species, such as beef, pork, or chicken, is needed by the automated export library to determine product eligibility and is now a required product descriptor on the application. Next slide. The maturity less than 30 months attribute pertains to beef and is used to ensure that the product meets the country's import requirements. The automated export library uses this information to determine product eligibility in PHIS. Next slide. The frozen shelf-stable product attribute is needed to validate eligibility for replacement certificates. Next slide. The last difference on the form is the type of packages field. Next slide. Now let's take a few minutes to talk about the different statuses an application can have. Next slide. All applications start as unsubmitted. After you click Submit, the application has the interim status of submitted. When you click Submit, the IPP or the implant personnel at your establishment will have a task on their task calendar. At that point, it will be available for your inspector to start his or her export task. The next stage of the application depends on how many levels of approval are involved. The status could go from submitted straight to approved, or the status could go from submitted to approved by the CSI, then to approved, and the final approval would be by a public health veterinarian based on the country's requirements. Next slide. The other option would be that after the application is submitted, an issue is found and the application is rejected. Can you go back one slide? I think okay, so this is the slide that shows the statuses if after it's submitted, an issue is found and the application is rejected. Next slide. This slide shows when an export applicant clicks the View 9060 from the left navigation menu, he will see a list of the 9060 records submitted at his establishment. Here you can see some of the different statuses, which include submitted, unsubmitted, rejected by CSI, approved by CSI, and approved. Next slide. Now let's walk through how to create, edit, submit, and delete 9060-6 applications. Next slide. First, we will discuss the steps on how to create a new application. From the left navigation menu, you would click View 9060. On the Create View 9060 page, you would click Create Application, which is above the grid. Next slide. This slide shows the list of establishments that this export applicant is associated with. The applicant clicks the home icon for the desired exporting establishment. In this scenario, or in this example, there's only one establishment. So the applicant would click on the home icon to select that establishment. Next slide. From there, the data entry process gets underway. On the application type page, you would select the shipment type, one of the shipment types we showed you earlier, and then the application type would be new, as this is a new application you're creating, and then you would click next. Next slide. On the export applicant information page, you would complete the required fields and click next. The export establishment number field on this page is where you select the specific establishment number that will go on the application and eventually on the certificate as the exporting establishment. What appears in the drop-down for this field is limited to the establishment you selected in the first step. As an applicant, you can only select from the export establishments where you are enrolled as a user. As a broker, there is no restriction on which establishments you can select for the export establishment number. Next slide. This same page is also where you would indicate which identifier you will be using, the USDA export mark or a unique identifier. If you select unique identifier option, you must type in the number or code you will be using in the field provided. You will also need to type that unique identifier in the required statements for the export certificate field, which is on the last data entry page. Next slide. On the import company page, you would complete the required fields for where the product is headed to, and you would click next. Next slide. On the product summary page, you would click the Add Product link at the top of the empty grid to start adding your product for this application. Next slide. On the Add Product General page, you would add information about your first product and click Next. For each product, you will need to provide the name, the HACCP category, and species on this page. Note that the HACCP category and species are limited to a drop-down list, while the product name is a free text field. There's also a link to the export library for the country you are shipping to. In this case, it is the Australian Export Library link. This is set to Australia because earlier in the data entry process, we indicated that the destination country is Australia. This feature allows you to verify the country's requirements while you are still in PHIS. On the next page, you would add additional information about your first product, including the establishment number on the product's label. To complete the establishment number field, you would click the pencil icon to the right of the field. Note that on this page, the maturity field is optional, unless the species or the product you selected was beef. For all products, you need to indicate whether the product is frozen, shelf-stable. You need to type the weight of the product and the number of packages, and you need to select the type of package. When you click the pencil icon, the establishment search window appears where you can search for any establishment. On the establishment search window, you would select one of the search fields or a combination of search fields and select search, then you would select the desired establishment in the resulting list by clicking the house icon. Next slide. After you have selected the establishment, you need to narrow down which establishment number appears on the 9060-5 certificate by selecting one of the establishment numbers from the drop-down list. This is the establishment number that appears on the product label. Then you would click Finish to indicate you are finished adding the first product on your 9060-6 application. After you click Finish, PHIS refreshes the page and displays the product grid again. Here we can see we have the product that we just added in the grid. At this point, you can add more products or continue with the remaining part of data entry for the application, if your application has only one product listed. After you have added all your products, it is important to look at the attestation and certification statements on the product summary page. We will start with the attestation statement. Because there's no longer the physical action of signing the 9060-6 application, checking this box is equivalent to signing the application. You must select this box before clicking Next. The product summary page also contains certification statements. You would select the applicable statements for your application. Please note that you would not select either the meat or poultry statement together with the Saluriformes statement because the Saluriformes products must go on a separate application. After the product summary page comes the shipment page. The shipment page is where you would add the commercial container number and the commercial seal number. PHIS allows you to enter multiple records to store this information. You can also get to this information without opening the application record by accessing it from the View 9060 page, and we will go over that a little later in our presentation. Now, the Submit page has several important functions. At the top of the page, in the products grid, it allows you to verify your product information. You could make changes here if you needed to one of the products on your application. On the rest of the page, there are two documentation grids for adding documents and the text fields for the statements that are required to appear on the 9060-5 certificate. Attaching documents process is the same as in other areas of PHIS. There are two grids. One is for the supplemental or required documents, and one is for supportive or optional documents. For the required statements to the export certificate field, you can go to the export library and cut and paste the required statements. Then, if you need to, once the information is in the text box, you can edit. Once you are finished editing in the text box, you would click Save. This next part of the presentation deals with how you can manage applications once they exist in PHIS. Now let's go back and look at some of the options we have from the View 9060 page. One of the options you have is to edit the seal and container number. This information can be added during the initial data entry process, but it is often not known until the application is submitted, or sometimes not until after the application is approved. If you have seal and container number information that you want to add to the 9060 record, you can always access these fields as long as the application hasn't been rejected or your certificate hasn't been replaced in the replacement scenario. If you click the pencil icon in the seal and container column, the container and seal information window appears. If the information had already been added, the information would appear in this window. If no information had been added, the window appears as an empty grid, as shown here. Next slide. Just to remind you, we saw these same fields, commercial container number and commercial seal number, during the 9060 application data entry process. FSIS provided this tool that can be accessed via the View 9060 page, so you can edit the container and seal information without having to open the application record. Once the application is being reviewed by FSIS in-plant personnel, many of the fields can no longer be edited by applicants or brokers. But we added this ability to edit the container and seal information without opening the 9060 record because this information can change and is not always known until after the application has been approved. Another option you have from the View 9060 page is to unlock submitted applications. Once you click the lock icon, the status and the icon change. Not all submitted applications can be locked because once the in-plant personnel have started reviewing your application, the electronic record is no longer available for editing. It is also important to remember that after you have unlocked your record and made your edits, you need to submit the record again. The in-plant personnel cannot approve your application if it is in unlocked status. This slide shows the same record, but now the status is unlocked. Clicking the pencil icon lets you edit anything about the application unless this application was created out of the replacement process. Then there will be certain parts of the product grid that will not be editable. But we will talk about those details when we talk about replacement later on in the presentation. Again, it is important to resubmit the application after you have finished editing it. Now we will be discussing managing replacements and specifically how certificates are used in the replacement process. Just like today, there are three types of replacements: one-to-one replacement, consolidated, and split. All of these scenarios involve starting with approved certificates. Once you have created an application via the replacement process, your original certificate can no longer be used. Just like today, that certificate in PHIS will now have a status of replaced. This happens even if the new application or applications are rejected for some reason. You cannot go back to your original certificate and use it to export products in that scenario. The possible scenarios in PHIS will be doing a one-to-one replacement starting from a paper application that was created outside of PHIS to an electronic application in PHIS, or doing a one-to-one replacement from a PHIS-generated certificate to an electronic PHIS application. There's also a consolidated application and split applications. So the first scenario we will talk about is doing a one-to-one replacement from a pre-printed paper certificate done outside of PHIS and replacing it with a PHIS-generated application. At launch, there will be some instances where the approved certificate that needs to be replaced is a pre-printed paper certificate. PHIS will accommodate the one-to-one replacement scenario for an approved certificate that was generated outside of PHIS for one that was generated by PHIS, although the steps and available functionality are different. So on the application type page, you would select the shipment type and application type of replacement. Then you would select a reason for doing the replacement. In the next field, you would type the certificate number you are replacing. For this scenario, we're talking about certificates that were created outside of PHIS. So the format should be 3 letters and 6 numbers. Then you would click Next. At this point, the process is the same as creating a new application because there's no data in PHIS to pre-populate the fields. Because this is a replacement certificate, you are responsible for typing the required replacement statement in the required statement field on the Submit application page. Now we will talk about doing a one-to-one replacement from an approved PHIS-generated certificate. So as you can see, the first steps are the same. On the application type page, you would select shipment type and application type of replacement. Then you would select the reason you are doing the replacement from the drop-down list of reasons. Here you would type the certificate number you are replacing. As this certificate number was generated in PHIS, the format should be 7 numbers. Then you would click Next. The status of the certificate you are trying to replace must be approved. At this point, the process is similar to creating a new application, but the fields are pre-populated. So in this screenshot, you can see that the data from the original certificate was pre-populated on this page. Most of the pre-populated fields are editable, but not the product-related fields. For example, there is no way to add additional products to a one-to-one replacement application. On the Add Product Step 1 page, none of those fields are editable. You cannot change the product name, the product code, the HACCP category, or the species of the product for your replacement application. On the Add Product Step 2 page, the only editable fields are the weight and number of packages. You cannot put more product on your application than what was on your original certificate, just as today. After you finish with the product and check the attestation statement, you can move through the rest of the application. Thank you. After you finish with the products and check the attestation statement, you can move through the rest of the application and make any necessary edits. Again, because this is a replacement certificate, you're responsible for typing the required replacement statement in the required statements field on the Submit application page. Now we will talk about doing a consolidated certificate from PHIS-generated approved certificates. On the application type page, you would select the shipment type and the application type of consolidation. You would then select a reason for doing the replacement from the drop-down list of reasons. You would type the certificate numbers you are consolidating. And when you enter the numbers, you would separate the numbers with a comma but no spaces. Then you would click Next. At this point, the process is similar to creating a new application, but again, because these were certificates that were generated in PHIS, the data entry fields are pre-populated. Most of the pre-populated fields are editable, but again, not with the product-related fields. There is no way to add, edit, or delete any product on the new application during the consolidation process. After you check the attestation statement on the product summary page, you can move through the rest of the application and make any necessary edits. Again, because this is a replacement certificate, you're responsible for typing the required replacement statement in the required statements field on the Submit Application page. Now we will talk about doing a split certificate for an approved PHIS-generated certificate. On the application type page, you would select the shipment type, and here you would select the application type of split. Then you would select a reason for doing the replacement from the drop-down list of reasons. Next, you would type the certificate number that you are replacing and how many new applications you want to create from the original certificate. The next page in PHIS will display a grid based on your entry and the product information of the approved certificate. This is where you would split the product across the new applications. After you have divided the product across the new applications, PHIS provides you with a grid with the new application numbers. After you click Finish, PHIS displays a message that contains hyperlinks to the new applications. So you can note the new numbers that have been created and click one of the links to edit the selected application. When you open that application, you will be able to edit any of the fields at the application level, but you will not be able to edit the product grid other than reducing the weight and number of packages of certain products. Before you submit each of the new applications, you need to remember to type the required replacement statement in the required statements field on the Submit Application page. Okay, so now I know that was a lot of information, a lot of especially new information about how the process will work in PHIS. So are there questions in the room? Go ahead. Okay, I'm going to try to repeat the question. The question was about on slide 90, there was on field 11 on the new 9060-6 application, there is a field called the export mark to be used. And the question was, if you do not have a unique identifier, what do you do for that particular field? And so you would select the checkbox that you're going to use the USDA export mark. So you have a choice between using the export marks like you do today or using a unique identifier.
The question was, what does the export mark look like? And it will be the 7-digit export certificate number. For the PHIS generated numbers, they'll be 7 digits, no letters, which is different from the current system, which uses 3 letters followed by 6 digits. So if they choose the USDA mark, 7 digits, or if they choose the unique identifier, then they'll have to enter that unique identifier into the field. The question was on the hazard categories, is that a drop-down list? And the answer is yes. The question relates to the maturity item, and that will be less than 30 months, yes or no. And that pertains to beef only. The question relates to, if you say yes, do you have to supply a declaration relating to an ED program? That information will be verified by inspectors just as it is today. In PHIS, the validation system will use the yes or no, whether it's less than or over 30 months, to help verify eligibility. But that will not change the verification that IPP do as far as declarations and the ED program. Okay, the question pertains to the inability to add more product than what appeared on the original certificate. Does that pertain to the number of cartons, weight, or both? The answer is both. You cannot add more packages, and you cannot add more weight than what appeared on the original approved certificate.
Okay, so we have several questions from the online participants. There's a few related to species, so I'm going to start there. The first question is, for species, what about products derived from multiple species? How will that be handled?
For multiple species products, the applicant would enter the predominant species. So if there's beef and pork and it's 80% beef, they would indicate beef as the species.
Okay, the next question, I normally submit my applications to our inspector with case and weights written in pencil in order to get a certificate number. There we produce and stamp the product. After that, I finalize final numbers in pen and give it back to the inspector for inspection. That is when he signs off on the application and provides me the certification to type up.
So in PHIS, you will, as soon as you get to the second page of the data entry process, and you've entered, like you want to do a new application, you will see on the data entry page, it will provide a PHIS generated application number, which will then in turn become your certificate number. So you can go ahead and fill out the information, put in the information you think you will have as far as the weights and the number of packages. And you can just save your application without submitting it. And then once you have a better idea of the numbers, you'll be able to submit it. And then even at that point, if you submitted it and then the next day you realize something's changed, as long as the inspector at your plant hasn't already started the review process, you'll be able to unlock that application, make edits to the products grid as far as the weight and the number of packages, and then resubmit the application. So let me know via the chat if there's any follow-up questions to that.
Okay, the next question is, for a large company with multiple established shipping locations, which export establishment should be selected as my establishment in the beginning of the 9060 process? Is the export establishment number and the establishment number selected for 9060 application header the same for the export applicant?
So, we will get a written response to that question.
Okay, the next one, will there be a function to set up a default for the export applicant info or import company info so that manual typing on every application can be minimized?
So presently that is not a feature available. You need to tell us if that is something that the industry is requesting.
Under species, you have only one type of species listed on your example. Well, we already answered this. Yeah, will there be an option to use 2 or 3 different species for one product?
No. Once again, the applicant will select the predominant species of the product.
When an export broker is filling out a 9060-6 and can select any establishment number, will the originating establishment, okay, we'll get back to that one. If using just the identifier mark, will a USDA 7-digit stamp still be used on the frozen cases during export?
No, if the unique identifier is chosen, the product will be stamped and marked with the unique identifier instead of the 7-digit export stamp.
Okay, and this is the previous question. When an export broker is filling out a 9060-6 and can select any establishment number, will the originating establishment be notified that product is being certified for export? Likewise, when will the originating establishment be notified when an export broker files for a replacement certificate?
So, this is all in these roles that Beth went through previously. So, just like today, so if you're asking an exporter to manage that process for you, then you'd be giving that role either the management of the corporate administrator. Just like today, if a broker is independently through, bought by through a distributor and then is exporting it, that doesn't change the process that we're doing today. Not always notified if a broker exports product that's been bought and paid for through a distribution process. So we're not changing anything as far as that goes.
Okay, next question. The replacement application, export application doesn't list as an option to change the country of destination. By changing the exporter, does this allow the change of the country of destination?
The exporter, or the country of destination is editable and changeable with any of the replacement certificate options.
As long as the letterhead and all the other requirements are met.
Correct. As long as the letterhead and other requirements are met, then the country is eligible to change.
Here's the next question. When is the new stamp and Form 9060-6 effective?
So that will be effective on the implementation date of June 29, 2017.
Next question. What is the definition of frozen shelf stable? What are the options of this section? Yes or no drop down?
So the definitions of the HACCP categories are in the regulation 417.2. I don't know if that answers your question or is it more general than that?
Okay. Can you give an example of a unique identifier that could be used?
The agency has published policy in the form of a notice to inspection personnel, and I don't have that notice right here, but we'll make sure that that's provided to you that explains that process.
Is there a capability to feed PHIS data via EDI instead of manually filling out information?
Mr. May says that is part of batching, and that'll be part of our technical meeting and the next meeting with the industry.
If changes are needed in the weight or cases, do we need to start with a new application?
Again, this is Bill Smith. We have said that we cannot add any weight or packages to an existing application. We walked through the process, and I know we covered a lot of material on how we identify a split or a consolidation. And so what I'd ask is that you review those slides, and then if you still have that question, we'll have that submitted to the email address that we provide to make sure we get an answer out to everybody on that.
Next question. Will the new application form only be for the 19 countries included in PHIS, or will it be rolled out for all countries at the same time?
So the process starts for the first 19 countries, and then as we identify a date for the next set of countries and the next set of countries, that's when the new certificate will apply.
Next question. Will the drop-down list throughout the application wizard be available prior to the date when PHIS will be ready to use for export applications so that the industry can predetermine which options to use?
So we do have a couple. We wanted to present this information, as I said, as early as we can to you. We are also working on with our other staff about getting a simulated disc out so that you will be able to practice with these selections. My guess is that probably won't be available until spring, but as soon as we get it, we'll get that out to folks. And then, as I said earlier, we're looking at May time frame for actually having the application available to the industry for these first 19 countries. So we will communicate when we get a little closer to the time, the actual timelines on when things will be available. But we understand you want an interactive process, so let me say, to practice with, and we're working with our colleagues in the training to get that out.
Okay, next question. Once an application is reviewed by the inspector, the weights and case counts cannot be changed. Clarify.
Correct. Once it is submitted to the inspector, it cannot be seen.
Let me clarify that. Once the inspector opens the task to begin reviewing it, at that point it is no longer editable by the applicant.
The next question, how can you prevent multiple shipments from using the same identifier?
So the multiple identifier, again, we need to get policy. We need to go back and look at that policy that was been provided for, and the controls on that. The industry asked for that prior to PHIS, and so again, we will look at that. If people are misusing identifiers, then of course that gets into fraud and those other things, and we will pursue that with our authorities.
Okay. Here's the next question. If we ship two different product codes with the same description, will there be an option to separate by case count or weight, or will they be listed together as a whole?
That will be up to the applicant, just as it is today. However, they list the information on the application. So they will be able to list one product code with one product on one line with the appropriate package and weight measures, and then they can list the other product code with the same product name on a separate line with the appropriate weight and package measures on that.
Okay. Next question. If multiple species are equal in a product, can either species be used as an application, on the application?
We will get direction out. As a result, we have several questions on species, so we understand we need to get a written response on the whole species.
Okay. Next question. Can I apply for multiple establishment numbers on the same application?
No, there can only be one exporting establishment per shipment.
Okay. Next question. I'm not sure if this is already answered. If a large company has multiple shipping locations, which establishment number will they use?
So I think we're starting to fall over a little bit here into batching, and so we will go back and look at how we're answering these questions now, and then where we have large corporations with multiple establishments, we will be having our technical meeting how we're going to do that with our batching process.
Okay, there's a few more questions online. Is frozen or shelf stable the only two options? If so, how is chilled classified?
Okay, this relates to the recent notice on replacement certificates that's effective today. Okay, so if the product is frozen or shelf stable, it can get a replacement certificate up to 364 days later. If it is not frozen and not shelf stable, then the limitation is 90 days to request a replacement certificate. So if a product is chilled, it's not frozen. So it's a yes or no question that if the product is frozen or shelf stable, the applicant selects yes. If it is not frozen or shelf stable, the applicant would select no.
And then one more question, and then we're going to go to the phone, which there's some questions on the phone. Can weight be listed in kilometers instead of pounds?
For the 9060-6, the weight will be in pounds.
Thank you. So John, our moderator, is going to open up some questions over the phone.
Yes, we have a first question from Alba Eldario Varela. This is, your line is open. Go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit sick. My question is for the sanitation letter from Mexico. Are we have to upload it at the time of the application? Will we also upload the letterhead certificate, or is it something that we could file and it'll be on file upon request?
Okay, for any country that requires a supplemental document such as a letterhead certificate, not just Mexico, the applicant must upload the completed letterhead certificate to the application that Beth referenced in the slide presentation earlier.
Okay. And then one more question. With the new change to the export stamp of the 7 digits, for those companies that would use the computer-generated stamp, how will that be affected? And when will the new format be issued so we are able, to input it into our labeling system?
Well, for all exports that go through PHIS for the initial 19 countries, the new export stamp, which is 7 digits only, 7 numbers, will be required, effective on June 29th of 2017. The stamp should not change size-wise. I believe the physical stamp is still the same. The only difference is 1 added digit. So that will be up to the establishment to determine how they're going to print that to meet the new requirement.
And pound 2 will indicate that you wish to ask a question. And it looks like that was our last question on the phone.
We will get clarification. There's been a lot of questions on unique identifier, and we'll get to make sure the policy issuance addresses that, and two, we'll answer these questions.
Okay, we're getting a few more chat questions. One, sometimes PHIS goes down. Will there be an option to revert back to the paper process, or will using the new electronic system be strictly mandatory for the 19 countries? And from the same person, can the system accommodate a 10-digit product code?
So, does anybody know the answer to the last question? So the answer is yes?
Yes, PHIS will accommodate a 10-digit product code.
Okay. Two, with the system, I can tell you right now, if the system goes down, if it's a local, if the establishment will have a number of wall base where some other, at the district level or some other location may be able to print a certificate or move that forward. If for whatever reason the system is down for an extended period of time, then yes, we will have a backup system going to paper. We haven't defined how we're going to do that exactly. But go back to the system we have, but we will certainly be communicating that process prior to. As we also were looking for a failover application process so that the system is not available in one site but fail over the other. So we have some options on that, and we will communicate all those prior to June 29th, 2017.
Okay, next question. This kind of relates to an earlier question. Some countries require us to show weight also in kilograms and MT. Will you be able to show both pounds and kilograms on the certificate?
So, again, we understand that that's come up twice. We'll provide a written response, and we'll show a screenshot if that is available.
Next question, are you planning on having the batch piece ready by June?
Yes, so we plan to have a technical meeting in March, and we'll get a little more definition on the exact date, and then we plan to have a stand-up environment where actually companies can test their schema and that kind of thing, all in preparation for June 29th, 2017.
Okay, and last chat question. What is the max digit on the product code? The maximum digit.
So that again, we will respond in writing on that. We just want to guess right now, give you bad information. Okay, so I'm going to ask Beth to again go through this last process. Then I know it's been very long. We haven't had breaks. So then it's when Beth is done. Then this last process can be rather involved also, but it is very important for you to understand security and roles. And then again, we will go to the break from the end of Beth's to 1 o'clock. At that point, we'll first take questions on the last piece that Beth presents, and then 2, we'll have a general question and answer for as long as it takes to answer your questions. So, turn it back over to Beth.
Everybody, we're going to be talking about PHIS, some of the controls we have. So for this part of the presentation, we'll be discussing how PHIS controls who sees which 9060 records. And PHIS accomplishes this by allowing users to assign who has access to 9060 records using a PHIS ID. So each industry user, each establishment, and each corporation in PHIS will be assigned a PHIS ID. And then each 9060 record is associated with one or more of those PHIS IDs. There are two types of PHIS IDs. There are entity PHIS IDs and user PHIS IDs. Entity PHIS IDs include PHIS IDs for establishments and corporate entities. User PHIS IDs, as you may have guessed, are for industry users, such as export brokers and export applicants. So now we'll go over where you will find PHIS IDs inside of PHIS. The user PHIS ID appears after the username in the top right corner of PHIS pages. This example shows a PHIS ID of U-DESP-216. The PHIS IDs for corporate entities appear on the corporate profile page. And you'll see that outlined in the orange rectangle. This example shows the PHIS ID of E-FCHQ-2. The PHIS IDs for establishments associated with the corporate parent will also appear in the corporate profile page. Here we see the page with 3 establishments in the establishments grid, each listing their PHIS ID. You can also find PHIS IDs for establishments on the Select Establishment page for the plant manager. And this is where you would find a PHIS ID for establishments on the Select Establishment page for the plant manager. Now let's move to user accounts. The PHIS ID is an attribute of a user's user account. Other attributes include last name, email, or phone number. PHIS does not change a user's account or any identifiers when the user leaves one establishment and moves to another establishment. A user's account can be associated with one or more establishments. And for the purpose of PHIS, establishments are also called work areas. And again, we talked about this briefly at the beginning of the presentation, but the sole function of an establishment administrator is to manage user accounts at that establishment. Currently, the roles that can be managed by an establishment administrator are the establishment administrator role and the plant manager role. When export is deployed, the establishment administrator will be responsible for managing 3 roles. Again, they can manage users that also have the establishment administrator role, users with the plant manager role, and users with the export applicant role. And again, just like today, you can have one user in PHIS, an industry user, with multiple PHIS roles. So you could have one person that is both an establishment administrator, a plant manager, and an export applicant, if that user at the establishment has job duties related to all 3 of those roles. It is important the establishments have more than one active user with the establishment administrator role in PHIS. You need someone at your establishment that can manage the roles for your industry users. Here are some more user account reminders. If a user does not log in to PHIS at least once every 90 days, PHIS deactivates the account and the user is required to re-enroll. It is critical that establishments manage their user accounts by keeping establishment PHIS contacts page and the user's work areas current. So we had a question earlier about former employees. So this slide is user accounts for former employees. If the former employee had the establishment administrator role while he was at your establishment, two things need to happen in order to dissolve the connection between the former employee and the establishment. One, the remaining establishment administrator must remove the work area from the user's role. And again, just a reminder, the work area in PHIS is basically the establishment. So each user role has a work area assigned to it. So you'd have to go into their user role and remove the work area or establishment. The second thing that would have to happen is a plant manager at that establishment must remove the former employee from the contacts table. That employee, because they had the establishment administrator role, most likely listed in the contacts table. That table needs to be kept current. If the former employee, did not have the establishment administrator role, then only one thing needs to happen before the connection between the former employee and the establishment can be dissolved. The remaining establishment administrator must remove the work area from the user's role. So if a plant manager is still listed in the contacts table, it won't really impact anything, but you can still take that person out of the contacts table on the contacts page. But it is critical if they have the role of establishment administrator to remove them from that page. So now that we've talked a little bit about PHIS IDs and 9060, let's go into how they actually impact the access control of PHIS 9060 records. When a 9060 application is created, the user who creates it can also associate other PHIS IDs with that record, thus expanding who has access to the record. Although, because the access is limited to only those PHIS IDs, by completing that information, the user who is entering the 9060 record is basically also limiting the access. So every 9060 record in PHIS will be associated with one or more PHIS IDs. This ability to add PHIS IDs to or remove PHIS IDs from a 9060 record is called access control. This slide shows where in the 9060 data records the PHIS IDs are managed. In this example, James Madison is the user who created the record, so he has read, write, and access control over this 9060 record. He can add additional users by clicking the Add New User link, or additional companies to the 9060 record by clicking the Add New Companies link. There are additional safeguards in place to control access to 9060 records. The user role must be either export broker or export applicant, and if the user role is export applicant, the work area must match the exporting establishment on the 9060 record. So now what we're showing you here is how the safeguards work together to control the access to the 9060 record. And again, the three safeguards are the PHIS ID, the role, and the work area. So if we start at the top of this flow chart, the first question is the PHIS ID of the user who's logged in associated with the 9060 record? If the answer is no, that user will not be able to see the 9060 record. If the answer is yes, PHIS asks a second question. Does the user have the export broker role? If the answer is yes, that user can see the 9060 record. If the answer is no, PHIS is going to ask a third question. Does the user have the export applicant role? If the answer is no, that user cannot see that 9060 record. If the answer is yes, PHIS asks an additional question. And that question is, does the user have a work area that matches the exporting establishment? If the answer is that the user does not have a work area for that exporting establishment that matches on the 9060, that user will not be able to access the 9060. If the answer is yes, then that export applicant will be able to see that 9060 record. And the next slide. So the next slide is where we're going to continue later, but we want to take questions in the room now about the last section.
Sure, since we have time, let's do that.
So are there any questions in the room over from the last few slides here where we were talking about how PHIS is going to safeguard the access to the 9060 record? The statement in the room was that it sounds like every establishment should have at least 2 establishment administrators, so in case one leaves, there's still someone on the staff able to manage the user counts. And yes, that's true, and you can have up to 10. You just always want to make sure, and you want to make sure the people at your establishment who have that role are being diligent about logging in regularly so their accounts do not expire as well.
And another piece of that, let's make so a corporate person could be an establishment administrator. So that's what I'm saying.
Are there additional questions in the room before we go to the phone? We will go to the questions online.
Okay, so the first question online is, for these technical meetings, are you including companies to help in the tech piece?
So, this is Bill Smith. We will certainly reach out to folks to talk about these technical meetings. The whole purpose is to get the industry, corporate, and establishment technical people that have to write these programs and coding, talking with the agency people. So that's the whole goal in this technical meeting. So how we do about that, well, will be all part of the process when we announce the technical meeting.
Next question, what is the process when multiple establishments are determined at the time of actual shipment, about not at the time when application was submitted?
Ask that question one more time.
Yeah. What is the process when multiple establishments are determined at the time of actual shipment? I'm guessing instead, not at the time when the application was submitted.
Okay, there can only be one exporting establishment per application and per certificate. So there cannot be two separate establishments that are listed as the exporting establishment for one certificate. So, by default, at some point, whether it's, on the initial application, when they submit it or they edit it prior to an inspector opening the task, they will be able to identify or change the exporting establishment if that becomes an issue, but there can only be one exporting establishment.
Okay, next question, is the container or seal number a required field?
No, those are not required for every country and every product, so those are optional to fill in as needed.
Some countries do require that. That's not an option, correct?
Yes, some countries do require it.
Next question, is the access control per export establishment, not per each application?
So the access control is set per application. You can assign to your application if you work at a plant and you want all the export applicants at that plant to be able to see all your applications, you would always add the establishment PHIS ID to all of your 9060 records. So you can do it at a way, you can either assign individuals to a 9060 record or a combination of individuals and entity IDs. So if you do it at the entity level, it's like doing a group of users at one time versus listing out each individual user ID.
Next question is from a user who says that her company has several production facilities, all with their own establishment numbers. She was talking to her main plant that issues export documents directly, and no one in shipping or their QA manager or plant manager has PHIS access. How can we find out if anyone from our company already has level 2 access?
So this is something that the industry will have to manage. So you'll have to ask your folks if they've applied for it or not.
Next question. For a large company, will someone at the corporate level be the establishment administrator and maintain security for all of the shipping locations that actually produce the documents, or does each shipping location with their own establishment number need to have their own establishment administrator?
That would be up to the corporation to determine how their hierarchy is going to work.
Next.
They have the option to do both.
Next question, will export brokers require technical support if you intend to go web-based, not batching? Will export brokers require technical support if they intend to go web-based, not batching?
So there will be technical support for anyone, any industry person using the system. And we will provide that information, the contact, phone numbers, email address, hours of operation, and all of that.
A few more questions. Will Form 9135-5 be included later?
Additional forms beyond the 9060-5 will be included as necessary when those countries are rolled in to additional phases.
Okay, next question. If we make the same product at 2 of our establishments, can we just use one establishment number on the application, although we're exporting products from 2 different establishment numbers?
Once again, an export consignment can only exist at one establishment for one application. So if you're producing a product from 2 establishments, if it goes to one establishment and they are located together, they can be combined onto one application from the one establishment.
Okay, and this is the last chat question for now. Can access control with an entity ID be assigned prior to application submission?
Yes. So you can define the access control as part of the data entry that you do for the 9060, and I apologize, it wasn't in the first part of the slides when we were going over the 9060-6 data entry, because that particular data entry page is still in development, so I didn't show it as part of the flow, but it will come right before the page where you attach your documents, your PDF documents, and before you submit the application.
Okay, so those are all the chat questions for now. Are there any questions on the phone?
At this time, there are no questions on the phone.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Carol Spencer, and we're going to start the afternoon session of questions and answers. We'll start within the room. Paul, have any other questions?
Okay, the question is, what's going to happen on day one with the first 19 countries when an applicant submits the application to the inspector, and ultimately, once the inspector approves the application, what will happen after that? And in a nutshell, when the application is submitted, that will create a task within PHIS. The inspector will then be able to claim that task and open and perform and complete the export task when necessary. Once again, as Bill mentioned, we're not necessarily changing the overall processes that we have today. So the process would still remain that when an applicant is ready to stage a load and have the inspector verify that this shipment meets all the requirements and they're ready to have the certificate signed, then they would need to communicate that to the inspector in a similar fashion the way those communications are handled today. So the inspector would receive communication, they would go ahead and complete the task to verify all export requirements have been met. Then they go in the task, and when they approve it, they would print the certificate out as described earlier in the presentation on security paper. They would, that would be the 9065 and any 9065 documents, which would include the continuation sheet, the 9065A, which is a continuation of the product grid, and as well as the, the 9065B, which is a continuation of the remarks section. Those documents would go onto security paper. Any supplemental documents, such as letterhead certificates, would be printed. Those, once again, would be previously uploaded by the applicant. The inspector would be able to review those. They would print those onto regular paper. Then when all documents are printed, the inspector, if it is eligible for a CSI signature, and a similar process would apply if a PHV signature is required, it would be a PHV versus a CSI. They would sign the printed documents. After they sign the documents, they would scan and upload the signed document back into the PHIS task. Then once they do that, they would complete and close the PHIS task. Then they would release the original signed document back to the applicant in a similar fashion to how they do that today. Whether the applicant is standing in the room or they send a courier, whatever that case may be, today we anticipate that same type of transferring of certificates would happen on day one with those 19 countries.
This is Bill Smith, sorry I'm late. Also, foreign governments would have the ability to go in and view them if they chose to.
Paul, did you have other questions?
Bill Smith, we will get, again, policy out on the unique identifier, but my understanding of the unique identifier was that if you do a number instead of boxes, if you shrink wrap a pallet, then that unique identifier will go on that one pallet. So I don't know that that would go inside any inspection. Wouldn't be inside.
Okay, the question is, the FSIS certificate number would be used to identify each box. And let me clarify. Okay, first off, with the unique identifier, there must be a prior approval in the FSIS export library before anybody can use a unique identifier. So if somebody wants to export to Australia, if Australia does not have specific guidance in the export library that says a unique identifier is allowed, then they cannot export to Australia using a unique identifier. So that's the first thing I want to make sure everybody understands, is that there has to be prior agreements and arrangements with each individual country. Okay, so let's just say that Australia does allow the unique identifier and the applicant chooses to use that instead of the FSIS USDA export mark. Okay, what would happen is each certificate will still have a 7-digit number. Regardless of the export mark, all certificates will have the PHIS generated export certificate number, which is unique and will never repeat. So if the applicant uses the unique identifier, they would check that box, they would enter their alphanumeric unique identifier into the data entry space. Then they would also need to put a statement that would appear on the remarks section of the 9065. There would be something to the effect that the product covered by this certificate is marked with the unique identifier, and then they would list the unique identifier. That would tie the unique certificate with the 7-digit number to that product. There has to be that established link. Okay, so once that link is established, the applicant could then apply the unique identifier to every box. Okay, all 1,000 boxes if they're shipping 1,000 boxes. Or if a country allows a pallet, they could shrink wrap a pallet and apply the unique identifier to each individual pallet. On that same note, talking about the pallet, if a country will allow a pallet marking, that pallet can be marked with the USDA export stamp. So there is a possibility that you would see the standard export stamp with the 7-digit number that would mark a shrink-wrapped pallet if a country would allow that. Correct. The unique identifier cannot be added into the stamp where the 6 and 7-digit numbers are. The unique identifier would not be added on that export mark. It would be a different standalone export mark that would be on a label or whatever industry would print to capture that unique identifier. So basically, it'll be one or the other. Either they will use the standard export mark with 7 digits for if they choose the USDA mark, or the product will be marked with the unique identifier, whatever that may be, if they choose to use that, and a country will accept it.
I have some questions on the online chat function. I'll start with the first one, which is, what is the process when a product is from multiple establishments under, I think we already did this one earlier. Okay, what is the lead time for receiving the security paper?
So, I'm not sure that the inspectors will be able to order it and have security paper just like they have the export certificates now.
Okay. What is the time frame we can expect to receive 9060-5 and additional forms?
Okay, once again, following the scenario that I previously described, once the applicant notifies the inspector that they are ready for export certification and verification of a particular shipment, the inspector will review all the requirements. They'll re-inspect the product if necessary or verify the export mark, the normal duties that they do today. Then they will go back to PHIS. They will approve it. They will print it. They will scan it and upload it. And at that time, they will be able to release the original documents to the applicant. So it will be pretty much real time. Once the applicant notifies the inspector that they are ready to have a shipment certified for export.
So, I just want to be crystal clear on that. The application goes to the inspector's task count. That's when they will know that there's an export to be done. Just like today, if they're verifying food safety, they don't stop doing that and go do export. So, nothing changes in the priority of how inspectors verify food safety, issue exports, and those kinds of things.
Okay, next question. Has the USDA confirmed that these 19 countries are prepared to receive electronic documents?
So we are working with our Office of International Coordination to make sure that they are aware and prepared.
One thing to clarify on that,
I just want to make, so they know, and they're reaching out through FSA and those kinds of things. There is no electronic transfer on these first 19.
So someone who asked the question earlier about the additional forms said they were not clear on the process for the additional forms. So the additional forms need to be entered on the application and it will be issued along with the 9060-5?
okay, as Beth demonstrated earlier, when the applicant gets to the last page, they will be able to upload documents, and they will have two options to upload. One will be supplemental or required documents, which will be letterhead certificates and other documents that are required to accompany the shipment and the 9065. Okay, and there will also be an option to upload supporting documents, which is something that is informational that will give the inspector information to help them make the decision whether the export is eligible or not eligible. For the supplemental or required documents, the applicant should upload a fully completed letterhead certificate, and when they upload that, that will follow the task throughout, and when the inspector reviews and approves it, they will print out that copy that was uploaded, and then they will sign it, and then they will give the original signed document back to the applicant at the end of the process. So, once again, to simplify that, all required letterhead or supplemental documents must be fully completed by the applicant and scanned and uploaded to the export or to the application in PHIS. If those documents are missing, then the applicant will end up with a rejected application because IPP cannot, properly certify shipment without all the required documentation.
Okay, this one is kind of about logistics. For the veterinarian signature, do we still have to drive that to the veterinarian's office?
Okay, the good answer is no. PHS has functionality built in that when a PHV signature is required, once the CSI approves the application, then the application automatically goes to the PHV and a task is generated for the PHV, very similar to the task for the CSI. The PHV would then open the task, review the documentation, print it, scan it, upload it, very similar to the steps I previously described for the CSI. So the applicant will not need to deliver the application or the certificate to the PHV. However, they will still be responsible to retrieve the signed document from the PHV. So in essence, they're still going to have to drive or make other arrangements to have some delivery of the original documents once the PHV signs and completes their duties.
Okay, and this is the last question we have right now, so if you have more, please just send the chat. Are you working with the countries to get their approval to accept the unique identifier instead of the USDA certificate number?
Yes, as Bill mentioned earlier, there are discussions and ongoing communication with our foreign trading partners to get them, or at least ask them if they will accept a unique identifier. This also relates to the pallet stamping as well. And once again, when we receive official communication that a country will allow a unique identifier or allow the pallets to be stamped, that information will be communicated through standard means in the export library for that individual country.
Okay, next question. This is going back to the PHV issue. Can you please verify if the PHV will have to sign a wet signature on a letterhead?
Okay, the PHV will sign however the country will accept. And once again, this goes back to our communications with our international trading partners. If a country will accept an electronic signature, then IPP, whether it be a CSI or a PHV, will sign it electronically with their link pass. If a country requires a wet signature, Whether it be a CSI or a PhD, the signing official will apply a wet signature to that document, and that will also be specified in the FSIS export library for each individual country once we receive notification that either they will accept an electronic signature, or if they will not, then I believe we will communicate that as well, so there's no confusion or misunderstanding of do they or don't they.
Next question, what is the process when product is from multiple establishments under one export establishment? Products are made at 2 different plants and then stored at the 3rd location to export from. The 3rd location is the export establishment, and 2 plants are the establishment number on product. In addition, what is also the process if multiple establishments on products were found at the time of actual shipment, not at the time when the application was submitted?
Okay, once again, an application can only have one exporting establishment. In the situation described, you have 2 producing establishments that send their product to a central facility, perhaps a warehouse. The warehouse is where the product will be exported from, so that would be the exporting establishment on the certificate. The number on the certificate would also be included for the producing establishment. On the grid of the 9065, those would be the establishment number on product. So if you have one product from one establishment, then their number would appear in the establishment number on product. The other product from the other establishment would have their number, but they can only be exported from one establishment with one application and certificate.
Next question, what notification will be sent to the applicant to let them know that the printed and signed certificate is available?
They will be able to check the products grid, the 9060 products grid in PHIS, which will give them the status of all applications, whether they are submitted, approved by the CSI, approved by the PhD, or what the status may be, so they can check that. And of course, there's still going to be personal communication in each establishment. PHIS is not going to completely replace the daily interactions between our inspection personnel and establishment personnel.
Next question, Australia requires the 9115-2 health certificate. How will that document be processed?
Once again, all supplemental required documents will need to be fully completed and attached to the export application. And at the end of the process, the inspectors will print those out and sign them and distribute the originals back to the applicant.
Okay, next question. Some of the supplemental documents are watermarked now, such as China. How will those be handled?
We will develop PHIS as necessary to accommodate additional functionality down the road when we have the additional countries active in PHIS. That, as Bill mentioned earlier, that's part of the reason for the country phase-in plan, is some countries have very challenging and difficult requirements, and therefore those are not included at the initial launch, but that functionality will be incorporated in some form or fashion whenever we get to that point.
Next question. We request many of our replacement certificates from the district office in Atlanta. Will we continue to get our replacement certificate at this location?
Okay, replacement certificates will be navigated based on the designation of the roles by the district RMS. So, if an establishment has a district person associated with a role for approving export applications, then they will be routed to that district office. Otherwise, they may be routed to a local establishment, but that will be determined on a district-by-district basis by the district management personnel.
This is the last question in the queue, so if you have any questions, please send them. How is the application to be filled out when a product is coming from 2 different producing establishments?
Okay, once again, if one application is going to cover products produced at 2 different establishments, they would simply put each product on its individual line with the package count, the weight, and the establishment number on the product for each product. This is not uncommon, and there may be one application that may have 10 different establishments on there, 10 different producing establishments on there. So PHIS is built and will accommodate this functionality.
Okay, Lauren, are there any questions on the phone line?
We do have one question in queue, and if you would like to enter the queue, please dial #2 on your phone. I will go ahead and open that line. Gabriel, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. So when a certificate is issued, it's going to be given to us by the CSI. Are they going to print it for us, or they're going to give us a security paper and we will determine when and how to print it?
FSIS will handle and control all security paper, and the inspector or the PHV will print the certificate, and then they will provide the original document on the security paper to the applicant.
Okay, here at our plant, we get the certificates currently from, the normal with the inspector, and then we drive down 30 minutes from here to get it signed off by the doctor. Now, will the doctor be giving us the paper itself when we go pick it up?
Yes, as I previously described, what will happen is once the CSI approves it, it will be kicked to the designated PHV that's covering that assignment. The PHV, once they approve the task, they will print the certificate on security paper, they will sign it, and then once they sign it and scan it and upload it back into PHIS, they will then be ready to release the original signed document to the applicant. So the applicant will still be responsible to either drive to the location of the PHV to pick up the signed document or make other arrangements with courier or whatever they may want to work out with the PHV to get that to them, but it will be the establishment or the applicant's responsibility to pick up the original signed document.
Okay, another question. So currently, the inspectors carry a little laptop and a data card with them that half the time doesn't work. And what are we going to do when that happens? They need to be able to approve these applications. Will this upgrade in this system include PCs for the inspector in-house? A desktop PC so that they don't have to use his laptop anymore?
So this is Bill Smith. The inspectors will be equipped with the necessary equipment and connectivity and printers and scanners in order to carry out this function.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And we do have another question in the queue.
I have a question about the heads up, start of the application. How we do it here is I fill out the application and write the case and weights in pencil, and then the inspector gives me the certificate number so we can I'm just wondering how I'm supposed to get that certificate number in advance. Thanks.
As Beth demonstrated earlier in the presentation, as soon as the applicant starts completing the application in PHIS, they will receive the 7-digit application number, which when approved will become the 7-digit certificate number. So industry or the applicant will get that information very quickly, much more quickly than they do with the current processes. So you will have that available, and then you can edit the application as necessary as far as your products, weight count, package count, type, all that good stuff until the CSI opens the task. Once they open the task, nothing can be edited with the application, and at that point if something is incorrect, then the applicant would cancel or withdraw the application, or the CSI would reject it depending on the situation at hand.
Excuse me, this is Beth. Many of the slide shots or screenshots in the presentation, for example, slide number 104, in the top section there's like the header of the application, and I should have pointed this out while we were doing the presentation, but there's a number there. It starts with 7100, and it's a 7-digit number. That's the actual certificate number that's going to appear. It will appear as like the application number on the application, but then after it's approved, it becomes the certificate number. While you're doing your application, you'll always see that number in the header as you go from page to page. Does that help?
Yes, it does. But so basically, I don't want to submit it to the CSI until I actually am finalized. I can go in there and start it to get my number, but I don't want to submit it to the inspector until it's completed.
Yes, you can go ahead and create one and save it as a draft without submitting it if you choose to do that. Once again, you know, we do expect communication between establishment personnel and our inspectors that if you create and even submit an application, our inspectors should not be opening tasks until they are notified by establishment personnel that the consignment is ready for export verification and certification. So just because a task appears on their task list, they should not be opening it up unless they receive information to do so by establishment personnel. So that is personal communication that y'all need to work out. It should be very, very similar to what y'all are doing today. You know, obviously there's no task in PHS associated with the application, but when y'all are ready for a consignment to be certified, I'm assuming that y'all go ahead and notify the inspector that we have the product staged and ready, we're ready for this, and so those communications would be expected to continue in PHIS.
Hitting the submission is what schedules submitted. Schedules.
Yes, once the applicant hits submit and the task is, the application is accepted by PHIS, that is what generates the task on the task list for the inspector.
Okay, are there any more phone questions?
We do have one more caller in queue. Judy, your line is now open.
I just wanted to ask about system reliability. Are we, will there be scheduled downtimes, and what happens when it's down if we're, if we're at a critical crunch time to get a application or certificate processed?
So, this is Bill Smith. We try and schedule most of our maintenance on the system, weekends and weeknights, where we have the least disruption to users. If the system goes down for an emergency reason, usually an hour or 2 hours at the most. That's been our average. Never say never that the system won't be available, but my understanding is we have a 98% online rating with PHIS since pretty much since 2014.
Okay. We'll cross that one later.
We're all going to have backups, so we're aware, and I addressed that a little earlier. The industry also has to have backup if their system goes down, especially if patching issue later on.
Okay. Thank you.
Lauren, are there any more questions on the phone?
We have no more questions on the phone, but I have noticed that questions have continued to come in through the notes.
Yes, I have a few right here. So, first one is, today the forms are multi-part. Will there be multiple copies printed by FSIS personnel?
No, there will be one official copy printed by FSIS. In the final rule that was published last year, this was notified and the allowance for copies was made. Once again, for the 9065 package, the inspection personnel will print one official copy on security paper. For the supplemental required documents, they will print one official copy on regular paper. Then they will release the original documents to the applicant, and they can make copies as necessary to facilitate their shipments of the goods to the ports and whatever they need to do with that.
Bill said one of the functions of security paper will be noted, watermarked that that is a copy.
Okay, here's the next question from the chat. This may have already been addressed. How will we be notified that the Form 9060-5 was issued to be picked up?
Once again, the applicant can look in the 9060 grid on PHIS to see the status, and they will have to communicate with the inspection personnel at the approving establishment to make arrangements to pick it up or have it delivered however they choose to do.
Next question, will the system have a copy function for the application for the previous entry so that manual data entry can be minimized?
At this time, PHIS does not have the copy function to reuse data that was previously entered.
Next question, does the product list need to be submitted to PHIS to to the PHIS system by each establishment or is product information strictly entered manually on each application?
Yes, at this time, PHIS does not have a product list functionality, so each application would be entered from scratch with the product information entered at that time.
Okay, next question is referring to slide 111. The establishment number on product, will that attribute facilitate the combination of products from differing producing locations into one export shipment, say from an ID warehouse?
Okay, once again, this follows the same scenario we discussed a few times earlier. One exporting establishment is eligible to export multiple products from multiple other establishments. So there would be one exporting establishment, but there may be multiple products where each product would have a single establishment number on product. So there may be one warehouse that exports 5 products, and those 5 products may be from 5 different facilities. In that situation, there will be 5 rows, 5 products, then each one of those product lines would contain an establishment number on the product.
Okay, this is the last question we have in the queue. When will the health certificates be issued? Will they be completed when received?
No, as previously explained, the certificates will be issued by the inspection personnel when they receive notification from establishment personnel that a particular consignment is ready for verification and certification.
So those are all of the questions that we have right now. Are there any more on the phone or?
We have no questions in queue at this time.
So, Bill Smith, thank you very much for participating with us today. This entire session has been recorded, so all the questions and answers will be presented to you, and I need an address to identify for questions from the industry at this point.
Thank you. This is Carol. So your last slide tells you where you can send questions to. If you have export policy questions, they go to the Ask FSIS. If you have PHIS questions and concerns, including what you've seen today, you can send them to the PHIS CCD at FSIS. And for web services questions, such as when will things be posted, you can send those to Nina. It's nina.onit at FSIS.
Well, we will be coordinating all 3, so especially those first 2 addresses, we'll be working with our both the policy as well as the IT team as well to make sure that so if a question is a non-policy question is sent to Ask FSIS, it won't get thrown out. We'll make sure that the question gets assembled, answered, put out.
Yes, and you can also send them to me. I've gotten 2 questions since we were sitting here. Feel free to send me questions as well, and I'll get back to you. Carol.Spencer1 at FSIS.USDA.gov. Carol is spelled with an E, CAROLE.Spencer1. Thank you.
So,
any final questions?
Okay, well, we thank you all again for participating, and we will have the list, so we will mail out the CDs and material to everybody, and then we'll make sure the associations will all get it. And if there's requests for additional webinars or representing this one, the agency will be open to doing that.
And batching information, I got a question on batching information and when will people be notified or how? I'm expecting it to go out through the same channel as you were notified about this webinar. Feel free to contact me mid-May. If you like, I may have some more concrete information. If not, it will be sent to you through the same channel.
Well, the batching
you'll be hearing from in March.
Right.
And that will
Sorry,
be
mid-March, I said May.
and that will be, we will certainly be doing it through our constituent alerts and those kinds of things. We'll make sure it is advertised. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.